Well, hey everybody, this is Jackson Mummy for those of you that don't know me. And for the past 25 years, I've been successfully preparing students to take and pass their bar exams in California, Florida, Georgia, Texas, New York, New Jersey, around the country with the multi-state exam and the uniform bar exam. You can find out more information about me and about Celebration Bar Review at our website at celebrationbarreview.com. But I'm with you today in this Facebook Live video and on our podcast to talk about something that's really exciting, and that is a piece of technology called photo reading. We're going to talk today about photo reading and the bar exam. And I invite you, if you're part of our Facebook Live presentation, bring your questions, bring your comments. Be glad to try and respond to those. If you're listening on the podcast or watching the video later, be sure to type in your questions, send them to me, and I'll be glad to respond to you after, and we'll insert those into the presentation. I'm glad to have so many of you with us today and excited to have you with us. We're going to talk about photo reading, what it is, how it works, why you should consider it for the bar exam, why I think it's so important, why it's a great tool. I'm also going to spend a little bit of time at the end talking about something called paraliminals. It's kind of a weird word, but it's a very well-proven technology that is an enhancement to photo reading, something that I really like and encourage you to check out. And we're going to talk about how the paraliminals work together with photo reading to give you the best bar results possible. So stick with us and we'll talk about all of that. Well, what is photo reading? I mean, what the heck? Photo reading, that sounds kind of weird. Is it speed reading? Is it a photographic memory? And the answer to both of those questions would be no, it's not. This is not speed reading. This is not the, was it Evelyn Wood or one of those, maybe she was the typist person. But anyway, speed reading is where you're literally trying to move your eye down the page faster, and it really is difficult. What we're going to be talking about is something that's actually pretty easy. And, I love the comment against my better judgment, the photo reading thing works. Yes, it does. And we're going to explain a little bit why here in a minute. But always love it when there's an actual student who's used it who can say, yeah, it really works if you give it a chance. So great to have you with us, Christine. In any event, so photo reading is not speed reading. Is photo reading a photographic memory? No. It's a weird naming of the product because it sort of implies both of those things, but it is not. Here's what photo reading actually is. Photo reading is what's called a whole mind reading system. It's a program that's designed to take advantage of the skills that you already have as a reader and as a learner, and to bring those, the power of your whole brain, not just your conscious brain, we'll talk about the distinction here in a moment, but it's the ability to take the power of your non-conscious brain and really put it to work for you. And it is like supercharging everything that you've done. It's not something just for the bar exam. You could use it in virtually any setting, and in fact, most photo readers tend to find themselves over time using it at work for pleasure reading, for reading online, for all sorts of things, and it's amazingly effective. It's not a gimmick. It's not crazy. It's not weird science. In fact, photo reading started in 1985. It was created by a man by the name of Paul Sheely, who has his PhD in neuro-linguistic programming and human psychology. Paul Sheely is one of the founders of a company called Learning Strategies. They're based in Minnesota. And in 1985, Paul was doing work on how people were learning and how they were studying. And he was approached by American Express, IDS, as a consultant. And they said, look, we're having a problem with our employees reading too slowly and comprehending too little. What do you think you could do that might resolve that problem? And Paul had been working on his own as both a speed reader and trying to just improve his own reading skills, and continued to bounce up against the thing that I think many of you find, and that is that reading goes slowly, it's painful, the comprehension seems to be low, and I'll talk about some numbers, some actual statistics about reading speed and comprehension in a moment. But for most people, it's really bad numbers both ways. They read slowly and they don't remember very much of it. And so it tends to make even the people that like to read become really gun-shy about reading. Well, Paul started working on the basis of some studies that he had read and worked with about how people process information in their non-conscious brains, which is considerably stronger by a factor of hundreds than our conscious brain, and how we could employ what we already had without having to make this incredibly complicated and difficult. So as I said, in 1985, so we're now talking 30 years ago, he started teaching the first iteration of photo reading to these employees at American Express. And lo and behold, it worked. It worked really well. And photo reading took off, and Paul and his partners put together the photo reading course, the one that we employ in the bar review today, and they shortened it down from, hundreds of hours and pages of work to essentially a 5 to 7 hour training program, which is really totally amazing and completely effective, as many of our students can attest to, and I've been through myself. In any event, what they discovered was that there was a different way to read material in which you could retain the information. And isn't that the point of reading, is to be able to remember information? And on the bar exam, that's absolutely the case. If you're reading to be able to understand concepts and to be able to answer questions, that's very different kind of reading. And it's important that you get the material right and that you understand what the information is. The problem is that from the earliest days of our schooling, most of us were taught a very different way of reading. We were taught this sort of one word at a time conscious reading style. And the reality is it's not very effective. So when you move away from that style to something that takes in the whole page at a time and puts it in your non-conscious brain and then gives you a methodology to retrieve that information, wow, it's powerful. It's amazingly powerful. In essence, what's going to happen when you become a photo reader is that you're going to use your imagination and your intuition. Let me say that again. You're going to use your imagination and your intuition. And by using those two built-in innate skills and qualities that we all have, you're going to have a fuller, more complete picture of the material you've read. But here's the great benefit. You're going to be able to read in a fraction, and I mean a fraction of a time that it used to take you, and with higher comprehension. Now, one of the cool things to me about photo reading is that photo reading is something that's already available to you innately. In other words, we're going to give you a course, but it is a set of skills that you already have already in you. It is not something that you pour into. In other words, we don't have to take the reading and pour it into you and teach you something, but in fact, we're going to teach you how to use skills that you're equipped with from birth. And that's pretty amazing when you think about it. If this is something that you used from birth, well, it's just a matter of learning how to flex that muscle to make better use of it. And I think that that's important. One of the ways that I like to think about it, and Paul uses this analogy, he says the brain, our human brains, are not empty buckets, but they're searchlights. Now, I think what he means by that is that when we do traditional reading, word for word, line for line, with your highlighter and underlining and taking notes, you're essentially acting like your brain is empty and you have to pour stuff into it. It's this empty bucket and you've got to fill it up, and when you get it filled up enough, you hope it doesn't slosh out and you lose it, and then you carry it over from the well, if you will, and you try and pour it onto the test, right? Isn't that what most people do? But his approach says, wait a minute, treat your brain like a searchlight, like the information is already there and all you have to do is move the light to find the information that you need at the time you need it, at the place that you need it. Now, fundamentally, if you can get that change in the paradigm, you already begin to understand what photo reading can do for you. Forget about the mechanics of how it's done, but just conceptually, recognize that if you're not trying to fill up your brain with new information, but literally taking what you know and searching for that information, you're going to be extremely effective in the reading and the work that you do. Now, here's some interesting numbers that come from a wide variety of studies. The average American reader today, finished with high school and into college, reads at a speed of 220 words per minute with 65% or lower comprehension. That's on average. Some people a little faster, some slower, but 220 words a minute, 65% comprehension. Now, you might say, well, I can live with that, it's okay. But here was an interesting study. There were two groups of professional people that scored way below those numbers. Care to take a guess? Yeah, lawyers were one of them and doctors were the other. In fact, lawyers and doctors actually read less than 50% of that speed, so more like 110 words per minute, and their comprehension was lower than 65%. Why? Well, because you're sifting for all these details, you're working all this detailed reading. So one of the primary groups of people that embraced and went to photo reading early on were lawyers and doctors, because 220 words a minute isn't fast enough for all the work you've got to do, and certainly 110 words a minute with 65% comprehension isn't going to do it. Now I'm going to make a fairly remarkable claim to you, but with photo reading, you will be able to read, you ready? 68,000 words per minute. 68,000 words per minute with 74% comprehension. That's the average across the board. 68,000 words per minute, 74% comprehension. I mean, really, folks, why would you choose? I mean, you choose. Even if you're great, 220 words a minute and 64% versus 68,000 words a minute and 74%? Are you kidding me? Pretty interesting, isn't it? Photo reading represents a bold step, though not a new one, but a bold step in what we would describe as a provocative new direction in learning and education. And the reason I say that it's provocative is because most of what happens in legal education, and certainly in the bar exam, is tried and true. You've heard many of you have heard me say that people study as though they're taking Abraham Lincoln's bar exam. They study the same way. I mean, they might as well be studying by the old fire crackling in the hearth. They read slowly, they try to memorize, they try to recite information. It is a very, very unproductive way of working, and the national statistics bear that out. But the reality is that the way we now know how to read and learn and understand changes all of those numbers dramatically. And photo readers do exceedingly well because they're able to process much more information and to make better use of it. And so it's not, some people say, well, is it revolutionary? No, I would say it's evolutionary. It's the next step in the way you read and comprehend and focus and use what you've learned. And so everything that you've learned up to this point is a stepping stone to be able to photo read. If you know how to read, you know how to photo read. Sometimes people say, well, I'm not an English speaker. That's not my first language. That's fine. Photo reading, it will work for you just as well. In fact, in many cases, I've seen it work better for foreign trained attorneys because we get past all the conscious effort to translate words, which is kind of an interesting reality. But the reason that photo reading works, and I have taught photo reading in the bar exam for, I think, 8 or 9 years now, but become more and more convinced with every passing bar exam. As I see the overall numbers across the country go down, I become more and more convinced that photo reading is the key to being successful. And the reason it works is because it takes advantage of what you already have within you. It takes advantage of what you've already got within you. It's not something we have to put into you, but it's what you already have within you. And there are 2 resources that I want to point out to you that you already have. The first is your non-conscious mind. Your non-conscious mind. Now, in school, the way that we learned, typically, whether it was law school or preschool, but essentially the same was this. It was what's called reflective consciousness. And reflective consciousness really could be categorized this way. You read, you remember, you regurgitate. I mean, really? But that's what it is, wasn't it? I mean, isn't that what you did in grammar school and in middle school and high school and college and law school? You read, you remember, you regurgitate. We call that reflective consciousness. And that is the normal American style of teaching in most places. But what's really painful about that is that those of you that have children, or in my case, grandchildren, watch how children learn, particularly young children. What they actually do is the opposite of that. They actually learn with all of their senses. They have this very wide funnel, and they take all this information and then work through it, rather than this very narrow, one step at a time approach. But school reverses that funnel for most kids. It takes the wide funnel and it inverts it, and it starts up here with a really narrow funnel. And so what happens is we teach children to read one word at a time. Pretty painful. Pretty painful. And so we take this natural love of learning that children have and we break it down, we reduce it to this very painful reflective consciousness. Now, when we go to photo reading, what we're doing is engaging your non-conscious brain. And by non-conscious brain, I mean everything that's not the prefrontal cortex, the conscious mind up here. In the non-conscious brain, we engage all of the parts of our brain in this process that we call photo reading. Now, there's something called the Lyman standard, or the threshold. It's the threshold between the active brain and the non-conscious brain, or the conscious and non-conscious brain. Photo reading operates at the Lyman standard, at the threshold, at the connection point between your conscious brain and your unconscious brain. And so it takes advantage of what you consciously understand, but also what you unconsciously, or not unconsciously, but non-consciously retain and have learned. And the net result is that you've got access to a vastly larger amount of information. So that's the first resource that it takes advantage of, is your non-conscious mind. But I said there were two of them. The second resource is what's called the preconscious processor. Now, I have to explain this just a little bit, but essentially the way our brains work, as I understand it, is that they filter out information that we don't need at any given moment, and they route you to information that you do need. That's what your brain is designed to do. It filters out all the extraneous, irrelevant stuff and keeps you focused on what you need. Apparently, our brains can distinguish stimuli and do, without engaging our conscious mind. So there's all sorts of things going on in the background all the time. We have only a passing, if any, sense of it going on. It's just happening because our conscious brain is working on a very small platform relative to our non-conscious brain. Now, when it comes to reading, this has a particular application. Studies have shown that the non-conscious brain sees a word and processes it 0.25, a quarter of a second, before you have any conscious awareness of the word. In other words, our brain actually fools us or tricks us into thinking we're reading it. So we read a word on the screen or in a book, and we think, well, I've now read that word. But in fact, we now know that your non-conscious brain has processed that word before the message ever got to your conscious brain. So it's already there before that. That's pretty amazing, because if you can take advantage of that skill, well, there must be something else there. Well, here's the way that the numbers work. And again, these are staggering numbers, but consistent scientific studies and research and reports say the same thing. Our eyes and brain can gather material, information, 10 million bits per second. 10 million bits per second. Okay, that's pretty fast. But here's how much we consciously perceive. Ready? So we got 10 million bits per second. What we consciously perceive is 40 bits, not 40 million, 40 bits per second. So we've got 10 million bits that we bring in, but we only consciously perceive 40 bits. Another way to think about this is that if you were to put a circle around where you're standing right now, and that circle were, say, 12 inches in diameter, that would represent the conscious brain. It's 40 bits that it's processing. But the radius of the circle of the non-conscious brain would be 11 miles in diameter. Pretty amazing, huh? Now, to get beyond the need to control it all consciously is what photo reading does. In other words, and again, I won't sing it, but you got to let it go. You've got to let go of the desire to know everything one word at a time. And when you do that, what happens is that you now begin to take advantage of the non-conscious processing instead of this very tiny conscious processing. Well, that's a huge change for a bar taker, because a bar taker typically will come to me and say, I got to know it all. I got to learn it all. I got to read everything. I got to memorize everything. Oh, I can't possibly read as fast as you want me to because I've got to understand it all. Well, here's the irony. The slower you go, the less you remember. Study after study confirms that. See, the old paradigm was that you had to read to fill up your brain. You had to put information into the brain. But the new paradigm, and by new I mean relatively new with photo reading, is that you ask yourself, how could this information serve me? So in the bar, what you say is, how can this information help me answer a question, an essay question, a multi-state question? How can it help me inform my understanding of the law, or recognize how to write an argument, or how to be persuasive? How does this information help me? And when you can identify how it will help you accomplish your goal to pass the bar exam, your dreams of what that would mean to you, suddenly you have access to a vast resource that up until now was there, but you never did anything with it. Now, people sometimes say to me, well, is it hard to learn how to photo read? And I say, no, it's like watching a movie. It's actually very simple. It's only hard when people try to make it hard. And if there's any group in the world that's good at making things hard, it's bar takers. But the reality is that learning how to photo read is actually quite simple. It can be taught through 7 one-hour lessons that are part of the course. But the reality of that is that actually you can learn it in just a few minutes. It's not very difficult. The reality of photo reading is that any information can be consumed this way. Some people ask, well, does it only work for printed books? No, you could use it on printed books. You can use it on online digital books. You can use it for magazines or newspapers. You can use it for any source of visual stimuli. Whatever it is, it'll work. And I think that's really wonderful, because it means you don't have to have a set of printed books to make this work. Again, it's not speed reading where you have to have a printed book, so something to keep in mind. So what we're doing when we photo read is we're tapping into the genius that's already in you. And some of you I know are thinking, oh, I don't want to hear about genius in me. I mean, that's just psychobabble BS. Okay. But here's the reality. You're pretty smart to have gotten through law school and to be in a position to take the bar exam. By many standards, you would be considered a genius. Now, maybe you weren't a genius in your law school class, but relative to the world, you are a genius. I'm saying there's even more genius in you, and it's really relatively easy to tap into it. But for those of you that are, you can't tell me anything, I know it all, okay, you win, right? But for those of you that are willing to be taught, that are willing to let that inner genius come out, it can be a game changer. And at the end of the day, isn't that really the point? You want to pass the bar? Okay, here's how you do it. I mean, people say to me, what do I have to do to pass the bar? Well, I think one thing is you got to be a photo reader. I think it really makes a difference. Now, when you're photo reading, what's going to happen is that you'll be able to get through extraordinary amounts of material in much less time. Let me quantify that for you. Typically, if you take one of our subject outlines for, let's say, a multi-state subject, it runs about 150 pages in a printed book. And if you were reading it traditionally, one word at a time, it would not be uncommon to expect it to take you 10 to 15 hours to read those 150 pages. In fact, I have people that go far beyond 15 hours. The interesting thing is that if we test their comprehension at that point, comprehension is far less than 65% for those slow readers. In fact, it's under 50%. So it's a very inefficient way to read. Now, what we do in our traditional course is that we don't have you read it that way. We at least have you skim it. That's sort of the poor man's photo reading, if you will. And when we have you skim it in 3 hours instead of 10 or 15 hours, we see comprehension moving up, but still not reaching quite that 65% level. So you can skim and get the material that way. What if you photo read? Well, if you photo read, you should be able to do the same 150 pages in about 15 to 30 minutes, and your comprehension will be over 70%. Something to think about, isn't it? Now, the other part of this is I said, the people that are sort of resistant, kind of the flat earth society folks that are out there. But here's what I've discovered. If you want to get a different result, if you want to get something new, you've really got to do something new. And I think for the people that just keep trying to read and study the way they've always read and studied, they're really dooming themselves to pretty much the same results over and over again. And while there are things we can do to help and try and move that needle, there's no faster, better, more efficient way to move the needle than by using something like photo reading, because it gives you a new approach to the material. Now, how does photo reading work? I mean, what are the logistics of it? Well, it's actually, as I said, very simple. There are only 5 steps, and in the course that comes from Learning Strategies that we make available to our bar students when they order it, there are 5 things you'll learn to do. You learn how to prepare before the reading, which takes about a minute. I mean, when you're actually doing it, it takes about a minute of preparation. Then you're going to preview the material, which before you read it, and that's really just asking, what do I want to know out of this material? What are my questions? What if I were sitting down with the author, which in this case would be me, I guess, what do I want Jackson to tell me about this material? Okay, and you're going to take a few minutes, maybe 5 or 6 minutes on average, to preview 150 pages of material. Then you're going to photo read it, and photo reading is literally looking at the 4 corners of the page, if it's a printed page, looking at the middle of the page, and as if you were taking a picture with your eyes. So click, 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 although you don't blink each time, but you're really doing what's called a blip page. It means just a broad focus, and you're literally turning the page, saying to yourself, relax, 1, 2, 3, 4, turn the page. That's literally what you're doing. And you're going through the pages just that way. So that 150 pages will take you about 10 minutes or so to literally do the photo reading, the physical photo reading. Now, sometimes people will stop, and I'll stop here at this stage. People will say, well, I photo read it, but I didn't remember anything. Well, no, it's not putting it into photographic memory in your brain. You don't have photographic recall, but you're putting it into your non-conscious brain, and that's where the next 2 steps become important, because all of that material is now in your head. And here's the weird part. You could actually photo read upside down and backwards, and because of the way our brains process information, it would still be there. And I've done this, and I've done it with people, and it's mind-blowing, but it's the reality. It doesn't really matter. But in any event, you photo read for about 10 minutes. The 4th step is what's called a post view. Post viewing is when you literally go in now after having photo read and you sleep on it overnight. You let the material process kind of like a backup in your brain. And now you go back and you start asking specific questions. What do I want to know about the rule against perpetuities, or the hearsay exception, or the First Amendment with respect to freedom of speech? And as you begin to ask those questions, you find yourself identifying particular information in the text that's valuable to you. That's a relatively short process, in some cases 10-15 minutes typically, to just do some general post-viewing. And then the last step in photo reading is you activate it. You start using the material to figure out what's important to you. Now here is where it gets super cool. I know, super cool. How old am I? When we started creating the bar review course 25 years ago, so 10 years after photo reading, I did not know about photo reading, but I was working in one of the more exciting educational environments in the country called the Celebration School. I've told many of you this story. And at Celebration School, which is a joint venture of the Walt Disney Corporation and Harvard School of Education and Johns Hopkins and a number of other prominent universities and educational thought leaders, we began to discover ways that people were learning from kindergarten through adults that were different ways of learning than the traditional funnel that I described to you earlier. And we were working on the same the same paradigm that photo reading was being built on, without knowing about photo reading. I didn't specifically know about it at the time, but we were doing the same kind of work. So I started from the beginning of Celebration Bar Review to create a concept in which people would skim, because I didn't know about photo reading, but they would do a fast read, and then I would activate what they had read through the lectures and the question practice review, which was done in small increments over a period of time. Well, that was really powerful and very, very effective. When we then found out about photo reading, like I say, 8, 9 years ago, I was like, you know, the cartoon character whose eyes go boing, you know, I couldn't believe it. It was like, oh my gosh, here's a process that will work for people, and I've already got the activation step built into the course. So if you're a photo reader in our course, here's what happens. You photo read a particular piece of information, an outline, let's say. You go through those first 4 steps of preparing, previewing, photo reading, and then post viewing. But then I take over in the bar review and I activate that same material through the way I lecture and through your question practice. Activation is nothing other than what it sounds like. We're just taking what you've learned back here in your non-conscious brain and we're firing it. We're making it activate for you. And suddenly what you begin to discover is you know the answers to questions. You don't know why you know them, you just know them. You know how to write the law when you're writing an essay. You don't know why you know it, you just know it. It comes from the activation process that we're doing. So it coordinates and works together with photo reading to enhance it and make it even more valuable to you. And that's the beauty of putting photo reading together with our bar review course. And I say that because some people will say, well, why couldn't I just do photo reading on my own? Well, you could, and it would help you. But without our activation, without our coordination, you lose a big part of getting that material to work. Conversely, why can't you just take our course and not photo read? Well, you can, but if you photo read, you're putting a lot more information into the pipeline for me to activate, and therefore it's more effective for you. Hope that makes sense. I know we've got lots of you online, and if it's making sense, and I see some of you are already photo readers, so hopefully you're with me, and I'd love to get your reaction and feedback. But that is the essence of what we're doing. We're taking this information, you're photo reading it, putting it into your non-conscious brain, you're using that and your preconscious processor, and then I'm bringing it into use on the tests, in every method that we can do. Okay, so I hope that makes sense to everybody. Hope that we're good with that. All right. Well, that's all I wanted to talk about for today. I've got more to say about paraliminals, but I think I've given you enough here to work on today. So next week we'll talk about paraliminals and how those work with photo reading, and show you that. What I do want to tell you right now is that you can take advantage of photo reading in our bar review course, and we'll put the link up on the Facebook Live and on our podcast. You can order the photo reading course for $295 and add it to your bar review, and we'll integrate it into your studies, into your study plan, and I'll teach you and work with you. The photo reading course will be a digital download that you can put on any device that you own and take advantage of it and use it in any time and forever. It doesn't go away. I think you're going to love it, and I think it's a great resource for you. So I really encourage you to check out photo reading. If you're in our course and you haven't used it, check it out. If you're not in our course yet, take a look at photo reading and then look at our course, and I think you'll see that it's a good combination, and I encourage you to take advantage of that, of all of those pieces. Well, it's been great having you with me today. If you want to know more about this, like I say, we'll put the links in. I also invite you to join us on our webinar, How to Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. We'll be talking about some of the background about why photo reading and our approach works so effectively, and that webinar we'll link to as well. So for today, I'm going to sign off. Thanks for being with me. I hope that you are at least intrigued with this idea of photo reading, and look forward to seeing your name on the pass list and to seeing you as a successful photo reader. Thanks for now. Bye-bye.